political parties are a story we made up. It's all a story. And we've become trapped in this idea that we can't escape it and that the story has to continue the way it is. So I suppose my clarion call to trade unionists and creatives and everybody involved in activism is...
Not again!
Oh, again? Again? What's again?
One of the reasons I wanted to have this discussion was because I felt like sometimes, especially when we're just talking about defending the arts in the city, we can forget about the broader context in which that's happening. And the more that we've been sort of talking about it, the more I've been feeling like we really need to work out ways of linking this up with what unions are doing and other groups in the city, and actually sort of start to talk about how do we defend the culture of the city on a much broader scale. So that's really what I wanted tonight to sort of be a sort of step towards doing, really. So yeah, thank you for all coming. Just wanted to begin really by asking if you could just all introduce yourself.
Corinna Edwards-Colledge, I'm Joint Branch Secretary of Brighton Hove UNISON. So we represent, our membership is about 4,000 public sector workers in the city. A lot of them at Brighton Hove City Council, but also in community and voluntary groups, private sector, but all working in public services. And I'm also a writer, performance poet and author as well.
I'm Zoe Bailey. I'm a visual artist. I work under the names Girlshit and Zoe XX, as well as my own name. I'm an exhibiting artist, mainly painting, sculpture, installation. I also make artist merch, and I'm currently working on an art zine for Artists of Brighton, which we're hoping to launch in the summer.
And I am Toby Sedgwick. I am the branch organiser for ACORN Brighton, which is a community and tenants union with 700 members across the city.
I was really struck by Unison's Bring It Back graveyard installation. So you wrote, "It's hard to fathom how much the city has lost. The areas of the city that no longer have a free community venue, the younger people who can't get urgent mental health support, the vulnerable adults who no longer have a dedicated service to support them are just the tip of the iceberg." Could you tell us a little bit more about the graveyard installation, why you created it, and how austerity and cuts have affected the city?
Yeah, thank you. So I became a branch secretary 4 years ago. I've worked in the council for 22 years. And what's become clear is the last 12 to 14 of those years has just been constant decline and reduction. And it's become so much part of local government that we almost don't see it happening. So it's become normalised. So I think people have become used to potholes and parks with broken equipment and not enough services, and then there's ones that people don't know are gone until they need them. So if you've got a kid, who needs CAMS support, you'll find that unless they've attempted suicide, you literally won't get seen for at least a year. Social housing has completely, I think our waiting list is still in the thousands. So I think the installation just came out of this frustration that I didn't become a trade union leader to manage decline, to help the employer manage decline. And that's pretty much a lot of what we do. And at the moment, it's 90% of what I'm doing because the council has gone through relentless amounts of organisational redesign and change. But a bit of context is we've lost 500 jobs from the council since the start of austerity. So every one of those is a worker that would have been doing something that helped people, in the community. And I think what I wanted to do with the graveyard was a bit of a wake-up call because I found it so hard when this started 12 years ago and I launched something then just as a council worker, and a resident of the city, not as a trade unionist. But it was so hard to get people to engage with the idea of cuts to local government. People don't understand local government. We don't teach civics in primary schools in this country. And one of the reasons that the last election was apparently, according to some kind of democracy organisations, it was almost not valid because such a small number of people voted in terms of the proportion of the population. And of that, there were groups that literally were massively underrepresented. So not like young people who haven't been to university, for example, were massively underrepresented. So it's one of this kind of disconnect, this lack of understanding of politics, but also our system that has become so stale and has concentrated power and has disenfranchised so many people. So it was just this, total frustration. I just wanted to get people to understand what they'd lost. So that's what the graveyard was about, really. It's a shock tactic. And, when you're setting it up, everybody stops in the street and looks and is like, what's that? Because they're so realistic looking. And ironically, we were able to commission the council's own print sign team to make the graveyards because they take, some commissions. And the funding came from Unison, a national Unison fund. But interestingly, they funded it when it was still a Tory government. And we were all set up to launch this graveyard at Unison's national conference. Now, bearing in mind, Unison is the largest union in the country and it's a public sector, public service union. So we were going to launch it at National Delegate Council on Brighton Seafront. But Labour won the election and the Unison leadership got cold feet and they no longer wanted us to bring this graveyard to Brighton Seafront. They thought it'd be too negative and too depressing. So here we are, the same arguments, the same reduction, the same frustrations. And yet it's very, very difficult. We've not had time yet because we've been firefighting, but I want this to be a community resource. Those panels can be replaced with anything. So any community or anyone who wants to raise issues around austerity or cuts and wants to do it dramatically, we're happy to lend this out. But we will be taking this around key local areas. We're working with Brighton Hove citizens, so we're looking at schools and religious settings where we might take them, car parks, supermarket car parks, anywhere. We desperately just want to get people engaged and understanding how much has been robbed from them. People are paying more council tax than ever, but how much do they have now compared to 20, 30 years ago? A hell of a lot less. Yeah. And that is really down to central government cuts now, unfortunately, Tory and Labour.
Toby, you're nodding
along. I couldn't agree more, especially with Labour have got into power telling us that everything's going to get better and everything's gotten worse.
Yeah. Where's the change? That was literally what was on their podium.
I haven't seen it. Has anyone... We got it down the back of a sofa somewhere. I mean, has someone found it?
So, Toby, in 2023's Renters Manifesto says that a decent home is the foundation of a healthy life. I think this is also why housing is crucial to thinking about the culture of the city. Could you tell us about the housing situation in Brighton and how it's impacting its communities?
I hope you're ready for some also quite depressing stats. So the Renters Manifesto, that came from the 2023 local council elections, which Labour won with a landslide here in Brighton. And we put together as ACORN a manifesto that we wanted, and it included a lot of things, including a lot of stuff around housing. Most of our members are renters. Most of what we take on is housing. And yeah, we put together this document. I've got a few stats for you because I don't think people quite realise. I mean, the housing crisis is a national thing, but how bad it is in Brighton. And I almost don't want to use the term housing crisis because it feels like this overdone thing that people, the housing crisis, yeah. It's like I need a new word to shake people out of their apathy to the situation that 100,000 people in this city are in, because there is 100,000 renters in Brighton. A third of the city are private tenants. Brighton is the fourth most expensive place in the country to rent, fourth most expensive place in the entire country. The average rent for a one-bedroom flat in Brighton is 73% of the average wage. 73%. Now, obviously, the way around that is most people, you can't live in a single bedroom flat if you're a single person. You either live in a bedsit or you live with a partner. What you're supposed to do if you're a single person, I don't know. This is one that always gets me, and this one will relate back to what Corinna said about council housing. Obviously, there's been a mass sell-off of council housing since the 80s, since Margaret Thatcher, and 86% of council homes sold in Brighton under the right to buy are now in the hands of private landlords being rented back to us at extortionate rents. 86%. The right to buy has not been this mass enfranchising, this mass home ownership that will bring Britain into the 21st century. What it's been is a mass transfer of wealth from some of the poorest people in society, council tenants, to some of the richest people in society, these landlords, right? 86%. It's enormous. Entire communities, places like Molescombe, lived in Molescombe, I grew up in Molescombe. It's changed completely. Molescombe was a thriving community. It had its problems. No one would pretend it didn't. But it was a thriving community. And now it is a barren sea of HMOs where no community is possible because people are in and out within a year or two. And in amongst there's these little islands, one or two still existing council tenants desperately holding on, or homeowners desperately holding on, bemoaning the state of things. In 2023, at the end of 2023, we took part in a council consultation for a scheme called landlord licensing. So this is a scheme that allows, basically, in certain areas of the city, private landlords have to get a licence off the council. in order to operate, right? It's a way of redressing some of the balance of power between renters and landlords, and allowing tenants a way of like complaining if their landlord was misbehaving. As part of this consultation, we were asking people their experience of private renting. We got 600 responses in a few months. So this is a not statistically insignificant number. And we found of our survey, 79.8% of people said that their health had been impacted in the last 12 months by their housing. And 74.6% said their personal safety, not just their health, but their safety had been impacted by their housing. So that is, the testimonies we had were incredible. People who'd, broken boilers leaking gas into the house, windows falling on people, places with mold so bad people were going to A&E over years and years. And these are it's not just like, oh, this is bad, but at least you've got a roof over your head. This is bad, and you're paying £1,500 a month for the privilege. Mm-hmm. Again, what Corinna said about local councils struggling with money, councils are going bust because of the cost of people being made homeless by this situation. 10 people a day present as homeless at Brighton Council. 10 people a day just walk into the office and say, I'm homeless, I have nowhere to go. And then the statutory need for the councils then to house them if they have a local connection. So all those people need to be put in temporary accommodation. A little statistic, Eastbourne Borough Council. So for those of you online might not know, Eastbourne is a little town down the road, about 30 miles away. We as Brighton, the council sends a lot of our temporary accommodation to Eastbourne. They spend 51p of every pound of their budget on temporary accommodation. That's not 51p of their housing budget. That's 51% of their entire budget to run the entire town is spent just on housing people in emergency accommodation. And then we could start on a whole nother rant, which is Airbnb and the short-term lets. We don't even know how many there are in Brighton because there is no way of registering them or knowing. We know there's at least 5,000 short-term lets, houses that have been taken and turned into holiday lets for tourists instead of people to live in them. And we need tourists. That's how the city functions, right? But how many houses are even Airbnbs? We don't know. There's no way of knowing. And the effect of all this on culture is enormous. It's a truism, right? That when people can't afford to live, they can't afford to make art, or they can't spend time making art or spending time in culture. I personally used to be, when I was younger, I was homeless and I used to squat. And squatting was illegalised in this country. And a big argument that we would make was one of the things that squatting facilitates is these incredible moments of art. A lot of the big punk bands of the first wave of punk in the 70s would not have been around if there hadn't been punk. We might never have heard of The Clash, right? How many artists right now, how many world-beating, incredible artists, fashion designers, painters, musicians, novelists are not being able to create their art? How much are we losing because those people are dealing instead with being evicted, with the mold in their flat, with not being able to get a council house? It's in count. Yeah. And what you lose then, if you lose kind of that musical counterculture, that kind of radical artistic subcurrent, is you also lose that feeling of rebellion, right? And now, I don't know, I'm not young anymore. I've still got this idea in my head that I'm a young person living in Brighton. I'm not. What is the young people's counterculture now? It's like looking at grifters like Andrew Tate on TikTok, who are telling them you can get rich quick. And a lot of them telling them to get rich quick by investing in property and by becoming a landlord and leveraging it over other people. That's the situation we're in. It's not a pretty situation, but as we will talk about later, there is hope and we are fighting back and we are going to do something about this. The UK's shift into buy-to-let landlordism, it's easier to get a buy-to-let mortgage than it is to get a mortgage to live in the house. There's less stipulations, but the whole industry that's grown up around these kind of huge estate agents, Brand Vaughan, Fox and Sons, the as you said, tradesmen, the work in these properties, all of that is parasitic off the money that quite often you're struggling to get just to live in a house.
Can I interject here?
Yeah.
Ironically enough, 6 months ago, we had as a family an eviction order. From our home of 11 years, we had an 8-week eviction notice with a court order attached to it, pushed through the door.
From nowhere.
From nowhere. I had 8 weeks notice to move. Your world falls apart at that moment, especially when you've got children. It's incredibly difficult. People seem to think that you can just go and get somewhere else to rent. It's really difficult. There's so much competition for even looking at a house or actually getting to rent it. For the first time in years, we went through an agency because we were forced to. There's very few private landlords anymore. And you're jumping through hoops to meet all their criteria, guarantors, checks, access to your bank accounts. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We were lucky that we did actually find somewhere, and we've just passed our 6-month probation, so we're allowed to stay, which is nice. But every week, I'm hearing from friends on Facebook or people I bump into in the street, again, people that have been long-term renters saying, oh my God, I've got an eviction notice. The landlords are just selling up en masse, a lot of the private landlords. The houses were never great anyway, but they're just cashing in and there's nowhere else to go. Also, talking about the whole squatting thing, you know, I came to Brighton in 96. And for quite a while, I was part of the squatting community in Brighton. And it was an era where put Brighton on the map because a lot of those people that were squatting were incredibly creative. There was so much happening here in the 90s. There were empty buildings and empty spaces. And people would have ideas, but people would rally around and make those ideas happen. The council was a lot more helpful, or perhaps would look away, I guess, to allow people to do things. But people came here en masse because there was such an excitement around the city and things felt possible, and there were possible. And, you know, in a lot of respects, it put Brighton on the map as a place of culture, as a place where you could go and see things, where you could experience things, where you could be who you wanted to be. You could, you know, it was the San Francisco of the UK. It had this great reputation as a welcoming place where people were welcome, where anyone was welcome and things were possible. And obviously, as the squatting laws came in and that got shut down, people, you know, couldn't do those creative things anymore. And people left en masse, and people are still leaving en masse. And that's the problem. Mm-hmm. You know, at what point do you end up with people priced so far out of not just housing, but studio spaces as well, because of the constant development and Airbnb, all that kind of stuff, all empty buildings that if you leave it long enough, you can then apply for your change of use and yet another luxury development to be luxury Airbnbs.
Zoe, I'm going to go to give you your question. I know you've been speaking with artists, cultural workers and institutions across the city about the challenges faced by the arts. What have you been hearing most often, and what seems to be the root of the difficulties facing the arts community?
Well, I think Brighton isn't any different to anywhere else, to be perfectly honest. The most obvious thing is overdevelopment, gentrification. Artists quite often rely on lower quality buildings that they take over as studios. And unfortunately, we're faced with problems like New England House, which is one of the biggest studio spaces we have in Brighton, is being shut down because it's deemed unsafe. People don't expect that it will ever open again. There are hundreds and hundreds of artists and creatives in that building alone, and they all have nowhere to go. They have to find new spaces. Phoenix is another of our biggest complexes, which does an amazing job of subsidising the studio spaces there. But again, they don't expect to be able to take on any tenants for, I think it's 7 years or something. They're just closed to studio spaces. There's no movement in there. So we've got this massive lack of spaces. We have an amazing, you know, university with great artists, and they can't stay here. When they've finished and leave the institution, where do they go? They can't get a studio space. They can't afford to live here. So we're hemorrhaging talent, basically, left, right and centre in Brighton. What people don't realise, or what people forget really easily, is the arts provide billions in revenue to the UK every year. And by squeezing and reducing the opportunities for artists and creatives and culture to thrive, you're actually removing potential income from those communities as well. It's crazy. I mean, the institutions that we do have are already fighting so hard to keep what little funding they do have, that they can't extend it out to more people in the way they wish. The criteria is so strict for that specific funding that, again, it removes that. It has this knock-on effect of lack of opportunity, lack of connectivity, because everyone's kind of just out there desperately trying to do what they do. You know, we don't have a permanent collection art gallery in Brighton, which for its size and the amount of creatives that work here is quite ridiculous. So there's no dialogue with contemporary art in that way in Brighton. And the commercial galleries face such huge kind of business rates and rents. It's actually really hard to make a living. It's really hard to take a risk on new work. So you end up having a smaller rate of work, cheaper work, which then creates less income. So you're in this kind of vacuum of kind of no way out, if you like. So funding's really difficult. And whilst, funding needs to go to housing, we all need to have a roof over our heads, we all need those things. We also really need culture. Culture is something that informs us throughout our whole lives. You learn more from culture as an adult than you ever learnt in school. It's all those interactions. And like you say, there's all those brilliant artists, designers, musicians. We still have a grassroots music base in Brighton. There are still good things happening, even though a lot of those spaces are under threat. But I think visual arts and even theatre now as well is really suffering, It's really difficult. The spaces that do exist, they also have really long waiting lists for people to be able to hire somewhere. If you're going to find the money to hire somewhere, you can't take a risk with the work perhaps because you've got to cover those costs. So again, there's this kind of catch-22 of how do you take a risk as a young artist or as somebody with something to say? You might have something to say that's political. You might have something about personal experience that could really enhance your community and help reach people, but you can't afford to show that work because unless you can make your money back on it, there are people here that are world-renowned artists and creatives, and we don't know they live here because there's nowhere for them to show their work. They've never shown their work here. What's really shocking is that this could be a massive income boost to the city, which could filter back through into the communities. It's a no-brainer, really.
So I understand that there's another wave of cuts coming from the council. Can you tell us more about what's at stake and what you think unions could be doing locally and nationally to fight back?
Well, I think it's what's at stake is existential, really. It's whether local government is something that services statutory requirements or if it's something that actually feeds into and creates vibrant communities and protects the vulnerable. And also it's one of the major employers. And I also think in local government across the country and in public services across the country, many of those employers are close to not meeting their legal duty of care to the health and well-being of the workforce because there has been so much relentless change and cuts and reduction that the pressures on workers are becoming intolerable. And I think many, many hundreds of thousands of public sector workers are like literally a hair's breadth away from burnout. And I'd put myself in that category, to be honest, in terms of what we've had to do as a trade union. And I think everything is at stake. What I would like to see my trade union doing, and actually it's why I'm standing for the NEC under the Time for Real Change banner, is I want to see our trade union stop just being happy with crumbs from the table of power and strong words for Labour. Our union and all unions, we should be demanding pay justice. We should be demanding a wealth tax to refund public services. We should be demanding that a Labour government does not feed into rhetoric that increases hate crime. I'm quite frankly shocked and appalled. If I get on the NEC and if Time for Real Change get a majority, we will be holding Labour to account. And to be quite honest, why would our union be funding MPs who think it's okay to vote for welfare cuts, who think it's okay to vote to stigmatise migrant workers? This is not Labour. So I think trade unions first thing is that they need to be standing up to government and they need to be using the hundreds of millions they and the tens of millions that they give to the Labour Party, and they might need to put it somewhere else and put it with parties or coalitions that are going to do what needs to be done. And I think in terms of trade unions as well, we could be much more involved in culture and art and radical action. And one of the things I've been really exploring recently, and partly through my writing as well, is we desperately need creatives to start giving us visions of what could be better and what a better future looks like. Everything is zombie apocalypses and the end of the world, and everything is dystopia. And actually, every single thing is invented. Money is a story. Religion is a story we made up, organised religion, not spirituality, but organised religion. Political parties are a story we made up. It's all a story. And we've become trapped in this idea that we can't escape it and that the story has to continue the way it is. So I suppose my clarion call to trade unionists and creatives and everybody involved in activism is if we just keep browbeating and getting angsty and angry, we are going to turn people off, and we are going to be more vulnerable to these authoritarian attempts to, restrict our ability to protest. So for me, we need to be absurd and creative. We need to become clown, help pass on messages. And the clown got away with things because the clown defied pinning down. So I think we need to have a kind of radical, absurdist kind of, we need to start using comedy and creativity and visioning and new ways of how the future could be, which is why I'm writing an eco-folk thriller on how crows might save us from ourselves, because this is the kind of stuff we need. And I think everybody can play a part in that. Let's show people how things could be better. And if you go past Lush, they've got a display and it says how things could be. And it's a display of a kind of LGBT, trans, inclusive, wonderful future with all these headlines. UK, most inclusive, supportive country in the world for LGBTQ plus people. And all these new policies have come in, equality for all. And it's like that. We need to be doing that on a grand scale with everything. We need to say council invests 5 million in grassroots arts projects for young people leaving school, or, we need to start putting those stories out, and then people can go, God, it could be like that because someone's made it real for me, even if it's just as an idea.
Would you say that we should be finding ways to link up with artists and other things? What
this is a shared, this is a shared cause, isn't it? It's an ecology, isn't it? Everything we're talking about, housing, visual arts, trade unionism, activism, it's all an ecology, and we all need each other. I mean, trade unions rely on working people. That's what we are. Yeah, I think we need to do far more of that, but I think we need to do far more positive engagement with each other, not just, isn't it all awful? Yeah. We need to do more of what can we show people about how things can be better? How can we get them expecting better for themselves and their families?
And so is it partly also stories about success? Because I think that's energizing. That makes you feel like you can achieve something.
Definitely.
Whereas, dystopian novels, for example, it helps you feel like they get how horrible things are, but then it doesn't necessarily motivate you to change things.
And just a really quick example on that, and this is in Rutger Bregman's book, Humankind. So what's one with the boys are shipwrecked on an island that all the kids have to read in school? Lord of the Flies, yeah, thank you. Every kid reads that book in school, and what do they come away from? Human beings are ultimately selfish and aggressive. And if me and my mates we'd all be attacking each other in power games. That actually happened. There was some school children who got marooned on an island, and they created this amazing society. They looked out for each other. They were discovered 10 years later by a fisherman, and they were all got on brilliantly, and they coped really well, and they created a really fantastic way to survive. So actually, when it actually happened, the best of nature came out, but all of our children are reading this thing that tells them they wouldn't be like that. And I'm not saying you can ban that, of course, but let's do more to kind of give people that belief in themselves and in humankind.
Do you have a vision for the future of the city? And if so, how could we get there?
Well, I moved here in 91 to go to uni, and I graduated at a time where you could still buy a house. I think the biggest single thing you could probably do would be stop Right to Buy and create enough housing to keep people here. So I've got 2 sons. How do they stay in Brighton? I don't know. I sell my house and I give them some money and we live somewhere, that is literally the only way, is parental luck. Is that, So I actually think housing is the absolute crux of all of it. And I saw something around how many artists, how many really famous actors came from council house families, and because it gave working class families stability. So I actually believe starting with housing, and so many, I've got trainee social workers who are our members spending 70% of on a room in a house even, when they're starting out. Yeah, I think housing, stop this. And actually, it'd be fascinating to know if everyone who owned a house was just compensated for the profit in their house, but their house was devalued, say, by 50%. Well, how quickly would that be crossed off from the money we give to private landlords? Because 50% of the national housing budget goes to private landlords. Over 50%. That used to be social rents that went into local government and funded more house building. So I do actually think that's probably the core of it, both as a trade unionist and as creative. I think, yeah, affordable housing and all those blocks that have gone up, wouldn't they look beautiful if we knew they were actually creating affordable homes? And I look at them and they're like these horrible monoliths that represent everything that is wrong with kind of what's going on. And they could be beautiful if the purpose was beautiful.
One of the things as a long-term renter and with the situation we're in, I absolutely agree with you. Housing is the key to everything. The first thing you have to do is you have to cap rents. Cap the rents that the landlords can ask for, not what people can afford or what councils will give or whatever. The other thing is you instantly freeze luxury developments. Developments of luxury housing should be frozen and they should be replaced by real means-tested affordable housing. And that freeze should stay in place until we've caught up, at least until we've caught up. I'm not a trade unionist. I'm not a council worker. It doesn't take rocket science to work that stuff out. It's basic. It's really basic that you look after the community, then all that money isn't being hemorrhaged away.
I read on the ACORN website that ACORN have been challenging recent council proposals around temporary accommodation. Could you tell us more about this and other struggles and how ACORN is responding?
I certainly can, and I was just very interested to hear. You might have seen me get this out of my bag. This is the campaign I was referring to, our cost of living demands. I just was like flicking through it, and it's like the first one, rent controls, short-term lets and second homes, affordable housing. A lot of this is in here. I'll just go back briefly then, just to the temporary accommodation situation. This was a proposal by some councillors of a certain party who are in charge of Brighton Council to balance the books, as I was saying earlier about how councils are being bankrupt by the cost of temporary accommodation, to balance those books off the backs of the poor by sending people away. And the proposal was to send 90 families out of Brighton, to save money. So basically, you see lots of London councils do this, right? Like, if you can't afford your rent, you've presented as homeless to the council, we'll house you, but we'll house you in Huddersfield, Carlisle, Newcastle, Gwent, 400-500 miles away. What that does, it's an insidious thing because it doesn't just get rid of the people. It's not just social cleansing. It's not just like we don't want poor people around here. What it does is it takes pre-existing support groups of families and friends, artistic groups, and just wrecks them. Says you can't live here anymore. You're not allowed to live here, whether you grew up here or not. We obviously we weren't particularly happy with that, as you might imagine. We spotted it. We just happened to spot it. This wasn't something that was being shouted about much. It was spotted, and luckily we do keep, as boring as it is, I do keep an eye. I read a lot of PDFs produced by the council's local democracy department. I read a lot of council agendas. And we just spotted it in the agenda, so we released a statement, we kicked off, we demanded a meeting. The leader of the council refused to meet us, said we were being aggressive, so refused to meet us. Our branch chair, Kezia, who is a single mum who is also studying for a PhD, working multiple jobs and was Section 21 evicted, went down to the council with a group of members and basically just called the leader of the council out, said, will you come down to talk to us now? We're here. No, obviously not. Kezia did a brilliant speech, which you can see on our Facebook. There's a video of it, basically saying, how dare you? How dare you tell me that I don't belong in this city just because I don't have the money to pay the extortionate rents that landlords are demanding. We did end up getting a meeting with the council where they did confirm to us that this policy would not go ahead, that they would not be sending anyone away unless they specifically said, I need council housing, but I would like to live in X. That is a victory. That happened because of people power, right? So it's very easy, and this is a big, great, long wish list of demands, right? This is our local campaign, and I've got a load of these. You can all have one to take home with you. But it's a great, big, long wish list of things. Nothing will happen. If I could just go and give this to councillors now, nothing will happen. If we want things like this to happen, the only thing that has ever changed the world, not just will change, the only thing that's ever changed the world in the history of humanity is people power. That's the only thing that has ever changed the world. You look at the history of every country, of every movement, of every revolution, of every revolt. It's always organised people power. The people we're up against, whether they're politicians from established political parties like Labour or the Conservatives or Reform, whether they are the property developers getting stinking rich from building those glass abominations in our city, whether they are the landlords, whether they are the CEOs of the companies paying poverty pay, whoever they are, they have a lot of power because they've got money, they've got access to politicians, they've got the media, right? They have got the narrative on their side, the story, as Corinna was saying. They say, well, that's how things are. That's how things should be. We can make it different with our power, and the only way we can do that is together, right? The only way we can do that is by getting organised. What does that look like? What does getting organised look like? It can be a bit of a buzzword, can't it? Let's get organised. What it means is looking at what we can win, taking what you want, breaking it down into winnable demands, building a strategy to use what you have, your people, how many people you can mobilise to threaten your target and say, this is what you need to do, or this will happen. If you don't, we might say to the council, if you don't carry through with these demands, you're going to struggle in the next election. We're going to look at, and we have started doing this, looking at what councillors have what majorities in what wards. We have members who will go out door knocking. We're not a party political organisation in ACORN, but our members would be quite happy to go door knock and say, don't you dare vote for this person because they want the housing crisis to get worse. They refuse to take landlords on. At the last election in 2023, we were in a scrap with the last council. There were some issues there. I won't go into it all. It's a great long story, but it's about getting landlord licensing in. Leader of that last council administration, Phelan McCafferty, lost his, after we door knocked his entire ward, and he lost his election by 6 votes to an ACORN member. So you have to look at what we can actually do in the real world. What can we do now? What can we do to fight these people and win? And take lists of demands like this into the real world and make them real.
I know you've been working on a zine to map and amplify creative projects in the city. What inspired this project and what do you hope to do?
Well, zines are very much part of DIY culture. I've made zines before. I've always been involved in subculture. So it's a bit of a no-brainer. It's something you can do with little money. It's something that anybody can do. There's not too much restriction on making a zine. And also we wanted something physical, something real and tangible in a world where everything's online and we're so bombarded with imagery all the time. It's so overwhelming that sometimes you just want to stop. You want to hold something. You want to look at something. You know, it's so important. It's a different sense. It can be, the online world can be so amazing at connecting and being quick and instant, but it is, you know, really overwhelming to our senses at the moment, and perhaps we just need to slow down a little bit. So how will it be reproduced? It will be done old school on a photocopier. We are actually making a paper master where people are contributing to the zine. Everyone has control over their own imagery. There is no censorship. It will evolve to be what it needs to be.
So will it have lots of pages?
Yeah, it will have lots of pages. Each person that makes a contribution will have a link to their website or social media, so you can find them. You can then choose to go and find them. So again, it adds another level of connection. But we want to reach people. We want to show people what's happening, what's here. There's so much creative talent, there's so much joy in what's here, but it can be really hard to find things when you don't know. When you're trying to find things in the real world, it can be a very different experience to finding things in the online world. It's a really simple idea, you know. It's called Art Now, More Art. So it kind of, again, in a kind of similar vein to my own work, it does what it says on the tin. You know, we're looking at that kind of connectivity again, and it will be free. It will be distributed around Brighton, and the first one will be free. Wow. Much to my wincing, I'm hoping it doesn't come in at too much money.
Respect.
But initially, I mean, there may be some kind of investigation into funding or contributions or whatever, but we wanted to give something to the city to say, look, this is here, this belongs to you, this is all around you. Let's get the ball rolling. Let's start talking about this stuff. Let's share it, you know, and it will, hopefully it will inspire other people to do similar things. Again, you can be DIY, you can go grassroots, you can make something happen. I think you
know, this really, sorry to interrupt, this really chimes with the last session Bradley had where he was interviewing, it was all about sort of modernism and Virginia Woolf, but she was talking about someone I hadn't heard of called Marion Milner, whose books I've now ordered, but she's all about not accepting, this is the 30s, but not accepting mass-produced images of what will make you happy, so you can kind of fast forward that to influencers, can't you, and kind of like capitalism, blah, 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 and like drawing and doodling and collages to find out what makes you happy, which is exactly what you're offering.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a nostalgia to it as well. There are people that kind of remember zines, people that have encountered them before, but there's also a whole youth culture around zines. There's a massive revival in that. There's something physical about holding something that scale that reminds you of being a kid and having a reading book that was more your scale. It's not this big thing. It's not a big newspaper. It's portable. It's shareable.
The sexiness of flip books from cornflake packets and stuff. Like things that you...
There's an interaction. There's something with the physicality of holding something in your hand.
Which works also for this.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
This,
you know, it's kind of, people collect that stuff. You know, you can go back and look at something. You think, oh God, where did I see that thing? And you'll be able to source that person. And then, you know, you're giving people power to connect to the work that they're interested in and the people they're interested in. I think for a lot of artists, you know, social media, particularly platforms like Instagram, are the way that people are still use the currency to book shows, find artists, all that stuff. It's something that we all have to do. It's very much expected, but it's so hard to be seen on those platforms. You get so little engagement. You know,
you don't always see what you want. You get advertising.
Exactly. If you're not paying for the content, you're not necessarily going to reach your audience. So if you can do something to enhance that, because we all have the power, how we interact online is how the algorithms work. So the more people that click that like button or share button, the more people will see you. So we have the power to do that, but you can't do that if you can't find the person.
No, and also that comes back to what we're talking about, community artist houses. You go in and you see a really cool lino cut card and you think, £3 is a bit steep for that, but I really like it and I'm going to stick it on my mantelpiece. Whereas you're not going to go and find that online and then order it and you don't all just like it and all the rest of it.
It'll cost £8 because you've got to get the delivery as well.
Yeah,
it's, you know.
Part of what you're paying for is the pleasure of going into the artist's house, talking to the artist, the whole physical experience of it.
I think Vivienne Westwood talks a lot about culture. She's such a great person to watch videos from, and she talks about engaging with culture and saying that you have to make an effort with culture. You have to work for culture. And I think that's the thing that we sometimes forget, that we have to work a little bit to find things. So it's not always the responsibility of artists to bring the world directly to you. I mean, we do the work of making the work, of sharing the ideas, and we do our best to bring things to you. But I do think that everybody else also, like you're saying, you know, you have to step up, you have to make the effort.
The consumer has to
seek
get off their
those
bottom
things
occasionally.
But we all choose how we interact. We all want to read books. If you don't use your library, you lose your library. You know, it's all these things are interchangeable. We all have to make a bit of effort and work a little bit. You make the effort to go and look at something. You share it. You tell somebody about it. It's all part of the same experience.
Because I think, is it that you're suggesting that people take away an A4 sheet and they have...
Yeah, I've created a template for the zine for people to take and to put their own imagery on. And the paper template creates a paper master, which will be printed as the zine. So it's really low tech, really old school. But it means also people can learn the process of how to do this quite simply. You know, we don't want to go down the digital printing route of it all being kind of slick, and because it looks like everything else. And then you're tied up with, have you got the technology to do all that? Do you have the know-how to do that? Then you're paying for the higher quality printing, whereas this is very kind of, let's have an idea, get some paper, let's make it, let's staple it up and give it away. It's a different kind of experience for people.
So yeah, the next question is really about cross-pollinating and solidarity. One of the aims with this panel really was to sort of foster cross-pollination and solidarity. In what ways might it be useful for arts, housing, unions, union organising to link up, and how might we do it?
That's a big question.
It's not the easiest question, but
No.
I think it's an important one to try and grapple with.
It is, because as we've been talking about today, all of this is one thing. I don't know how you want to put it as broadly as possible, but like everything's wrong. Like society is run by people who have a lot of power and a lot of money, and people have no power over their own lives, broadly, right? We need to change that. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in 5 years. It's not going to happen in 10 years, but we can move in that direction and we can fight in that direction. So obviously the way that Queen's had to leave, but the way that the unions and housing struggles can work together is obviously kind of direct cooperation. You know, we can do that. We have very similar structures. ACORN is a membership organisation with a democratically elected committee. So is UNISON. Right. It kind of works, doesn't it? I think the artist thing is a bit more esoteric. I want to talk a bit about our member Bryony, who is a member of ACORN and has been involved for many, many years in Artists Open House. She's an artist. She worked for many years at the Steiner School, which is now closed. She saw a kind of gap in the idea of an open house, which is that to have an open house, you have to have a house that you can do
and
art in.
Permission to show in it as well.
And permission to let a load of strangers in. So renters or homeless people quite often cannot participate in the open house. So what she did was she created a mobile open house, which is on Instagram. It's incredible. And I wish I'd thought in advance, like send you a photo. So we could, Bryony Devitt, D-E-V-I-T-T. She is on Instagram. There is like a BBC News article, like Artists Open House renting. But she did a doll's house, put it on the back of a bike trailer, and went round Brighton. She advertised where she would be at certain times of the day during the open house. And in each of the rooms of the doll's house was little bits of tiny doll-sized art or things she'd created.
Wow.
But what I particularly liked about it was some of the rooms had like rental problems. So one of the rooms had like black mold, and there was a little tiny ACORN picket outside with flags and banners. And as people were coming and talking to her about the art, she was using that connection of people have come over to go, oh, this is really good, to say like, but it's also got something to say about the state of housing. I would love to be doing this from the comfort of my living room, showing you all my beautiful pictures, but I can't afford a house because I've got to rent. And is this going to be, this is it. Yes, Bryony Devitt. This is an incredible artistic project by one of our members. There it is. Look, so she's got this little thing that she trundles around Brighton during the open house. And we get, like I said, we get a mention in there, but she's brilliant. So I think that one really good example, because often it can be quite difficult to think like, how can art contribute to a struggle? I mean, there's all the obvious ways. You can write a protest song and get it into the local news. You can, you can go and graffiti the side of a lettings agent, which like I have to legally say I'm not going to encourage you to do. But if you I think that was a really good example of a way that art directly contributed to the struggle that we're in, because that got in the local news. It got people talking about housing crisis who might not have been talking about it. And it also got us members, like people found out about ACORN through that and joined and got involved in the fight. So that's a really good example of these kind of things. And there's other things you could do. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is someone should bloody write a poem, like a good poem, and just stick it in a zine. Like, these kind of things, these happen and then people read them. I think, those kind of things are ways that the artists and people who live in that world can directly contribute to struggle. There are probably loads of other ways that don't come to my head. But I think, we can take lessons from history. Artists have always been involved in political movements, going right back to the very earliest kind of like modern world revolutions, like the French Revolution and the American Revolution. I mean, you look at the situationists and the surrealists of May 68 in Paris and sur le pave, le plage, under the pavement, the beach, and this kind of artistic movement of like making a break with a rupture with normality, because that's what art does, right? It takes you, the best art breaks with reality and takes you somewhere else. And if we can find a way to do that in a way that takes the place it takes people to is, God, fuck, this housing crisis is really bad, we need to do something about it, then brilliant.
I think artists are a really untapped group of members of society, really, and community. I think the one superpower that artists have is we tend to be a little bit delusional and eternally optimistic, which are actually superpowers when it comes to changing things radically. We can often state the obvious. We can see that common sense a mile off where other people perhaps are confused by other things. But the arts themselves can contribute in a monetary way into their communities. If we have the opportunity and the spaces, arts brings in tons of money. If you look at the regeneration of places like Margate, it started with the Turner Contemporary. Yes, they've got Tracy Emin, who's done amazing things there and has been a catalyst. But having a contemporary art space takes tourists there all year round to see those shows. It's something to do on a rainy day. It then builds, and if people are coming in to see those exhibitions there, then they're going to go and look around galleries as well. Then they're going to spend money. They've got people flying in from all over the world now to go to the galleries that are popping up there continuously, because people have invested in their own community. They support each other. I think people think that the open houses creates all of the artistic needs for the city, and the festival creates everything that's needed. And the problem with the festival is there's so much of the money from the festival goes into specific events that most people can't afford to go to anyway. And that money doesn't trickle down to the smaller kind of people participating in things or trying out a new venture. So we have this illusion that we're this successful cultural city with all this stuff going on, but it's only for a few weeks and it's not everywhere, and it doesn't sustain for the rest of the year. And it could. That's the thing. It really, really could. Now, there's so much debate about public art. It doesn't suit everybody. But a lot of those things, they're just serving to get the plans passed through, and that money doesn't filter back into the community or perhaps go to one artist if they're lucky. What if we radically rethought that idea, and when there was a new build, instead of paying for a public piece of art in that particular site that's kind of been neglected after a year or two anyway, why not, instead of doing that, put that money into a central funding pot that anyone from community in that city could take from? You could bid, and it would help with the shortfall in funding. There's so many possibilities of ways you can restructure how arts can bring in money. You just have to think differently. Like you say, you rewrite the story.
I suppose one of the things that I was sort of thinking that I really want to do, like even with just thinking about how to run Defending Art and Culture, is to try and constantly return back to this idea that these problems are all interlinked.
Yeah.
So when we're trying to think about how we solve, say, a crisis in the arts, we're not necessarily just thinking about the arts, we're talking about housing, we're talking about unions. So and I wondered, is there a certain sense in which maybe that could come through in your zine or something? Because
I mean, it's quite difficult because the zine is the first
experiment
incarnation of something. So because we've not been so prescriptive about submission, it will really take on its own identity. So it's quite difficult to funnel the kind of responses. You kind of try to herd it in a certain direction because you want it to happen.
Yeah.
So presumably you're editing it. So it's not going to be a shambles. You can't accept.
No.
You are deciding what you accept.
The plan is to accept everything. The editing is just merely not putting two similar things next to each other. The editing is literally about the order rather than the content. You have to trust in the process, and you have to trust in people. Things tend to have a way of levelling out and becoming what they need to be, but sometimes you have to give people that level of freedom, and you're often quite surprised because what comes back or what happens will be stuff that you never considered or thought possible. You know, and I've encouraged people to include writing and stuff in that as well. The cover itself is subliminal. There's text behind the image, so I'm not going to share that because that'll be a nice surprise when people see it.
I love an Easter egg.
There'll be subliminal things in it because people have got a lot to say. You know, it all plays into the pot, if you like. It's all everything's interconnected. Everything you do is interconnected. If you're not thinking about one thing, it's leading on a tangent to somewhere else. And I think the artist brain is very like that. The creative brain is very much like that. It's never just one thing. It's multi-layered. The more you peel, the more you pull that thread, the more things are revealed. I think we're used to having that kind of language in making work. The same with writing a song or writing a book or whatever. You're kind of connected to all these things you don't realise perhaps at the start, but they reveal themselves as you're going along. You are connecting, you're trusting that level of humanity. They will connect the dots themselves, people will connect things themselves, and I think when you show somebody something positive and joyous, they will naturally want to seek more of the same.
Yeah, I think that goes back to something that Corinna was saying about having some sort of positive message. But I think the other thing that I'm going to try and do is just be more linked up with different, actually try and get unions involved in some of the stuff that I'm doing. And so I'm not just thinking about the arts within different organisations in the city. It becomes much more of a network of all different things going on. Do you have a vision for the future of the city? And if so, how could we get there?
Do I have a vision for the future of the city? Yes, well, we do in ACORN. We're a national organisation, so it's not just about Brighton. We have a vision for the future of this country, and it's radically democratic. It's people who live in an area, who know what needs to change in an area, having control over their lives, not unaccountable developers, not these enormous corporations, not these monolithic political parties that have no interest in what we're doing.
Who funds it?
Our own members. We're a union, so everyone pays in a little bit of money, and that pays for everything. That's really important to us because, seeing as you've asked, I'll go to it. We fight and we win because this isn't a game. This is our lives, right? As we were saying earlier about behind all these statistics and evictions, it's real people, it's lives, it's actual lives being ruined and torn apart. But yeah, on the vision of the world that we want to build, we actually do have on our website a 12-point program. It's not 12 points, it's way more than 12 points, but you know what I mean. We have a platform democratically put together by thousands of members from across the country, come to via meeting after meeting to come to this platform. But, you know, we're talking about things like a just housing system, a housing system that prioritizes people's need, not profit. We're talking about food that is grown locally and environmentally conscious, not by huge corporate farms. We're talking about local democratic services run by and for the people, not run for profit. You know, we're talking about an NHS free at point of use forever for everyone. You know, we're talking about free education for all, for their whole life. These are things, they sound very, very radical, but all of them have existed in one country or another at one time or another. And in fact, most of them have existed in this country. We've had a lot of these things. You know, we had, after the war, we were building something like 3 million council houses a year. And that was when the country was basically bankrupt because we just fought a bloody war. You know, after World War II, we can do it. So when they say, oh, there's no money, we can't do that, they're lying. They're lying because they make money out of that. That is our vision for the future. It's just a better world. How do we get there is always the $1 million question, because everyone's got a vision for the world. Very few people know how we're going to get there. ACORN's answer to this, as I've kind of alluded to a few times, is people, power and organisation. It's getting people together in a room. And everything you were saying about face-to-face, physical, I completely agree with. We are a face-to-face organisation. It's built on the solidarity between our members. I know a lot of unions, especially after the pandemic, kind of moved to hybrid or online meetings. We don't do that. We have physical meetings every month in a room where we get together and discuss the issues and talk about what we're going to do about them. Those kind of in-person discussions are really important. And getting organised, understanding who has power invested in not changing things. You know, that's over here. What we have over here. So it's almost like an equation. Y equals X. Like, how can we here affect X? You know, it's like, I see it as almost like an Excel spreadsheet, right? Like if we have, 700 members in Brighton and a budget of X, and this many members who say they can contribute this many hours a week, and we have this many leaflets and a banner and this much and this and this, and we're up against this politician who's got a 600 vote majority, and they are the chair of this society and they have spoken at this event. So how can we use this to make this person do this, right? Once you've broken problems down to that level, it becomes solvable. It doesn't become this like dream. 10 years ago, when we were first founded, people told us we were mad that we would ever get Section 21 abolished. It's happening. It's in the process of happening right now. Across the country, we're doing this. In Bristol, we got them to invest £100 million in fire safety for tower blocks. In Norwich, where I'm based now, we won £7 million invested in the free school meals programme to get free school meals for all the kids, right? And day in, day out, so not just that, day in, day out, we are on the front line of the housing crisis, not just fighting these big campaigns, but supporting individual members who are maybe being evicted. We've stopped evictions. We've stood arm in arm in front of bailiffs and said, you're not getting in today. You're not taking this family out of their home. We've occupied and shut down lettings agents that are leaving tenants with mould. We've won repairs, compensation in the millions, repairs and compensation for tenants. It's all going on, and we are there fighting, and we are winning, and our strategy is working. But obviously the world hasn't changed yet. So what do we need? So if the model works, if it works, what we need is more of it, right? There is currently, I think, we're active in about 30 locations across the country, towns and cities, but we could be active in more. So we need more people. We need people there to join up and get involved. We've won all that stuff with 700 members in Brighton. What could we win with 1,400 if we doubled? What could we win with 10,000?
What's the criteria to join?
Anyone can join. This is it. When we get down to the nub of it, what it needs is people to say, I'll get involved, I'll pitch in, whether that is come to this meeting and share this event, or I'll help design a banner, or I'll come down and yell at a councillor, or I'll stand in front of a bailiff physically with my body and say, I'm not letting you get evicted today. That's what it takes. And the more people do that, and more people are doing that every day, the more we can win. Like, it's not magic. Bloody hard work is what it is. As you were saying about having to work, like, there isn't a secret sauce. There isn't a weird trick. There's not this one weird trick that landlords hate. What there is hard work.
And people power.
And people power, exactly. It's elbow grease and people power. The more people join, the more we can win. And that is my vision of the world. That's ACORN's vision of the world. And we will get there. I firmly, with my core, believe that it's possible because it's happening. We are going to win because we're already winning.
I guess mine's based on hope and inspiration. I think back to COVID, and the first thing that everyone did in COVID crisis was resort to culture. All of a sudden, those elements of our life, we needed film, we needed books, we needed art. People who hadn't made anything creative for decades suddenly found solace and comfort in making things and connecting to other people that were making things and doing things. So you can't underestimate the power of creativity and, you know, what it gives us, what it gives all of us. For me, my vision of the future is about legacy. It's about building sustainable roots for a sustainable future for communities, for arts, for culture, where anyone can walk in to a gallery, can walk into a space and experience poetry, music, art. Anyone can have an idea and it can be a feasible possibility to share, be able to share that with other people. I can't really go down the education route because that's a whole different kind of kettle of fish. But, you know, we have to dream big, you know, demand the impossible. Again, Vivienne Westwood, demand the impossible. Protect what we currently have is really, really important. You know, protect the studio spaces we have, protect the community spaces that we have, and create more. We need more of those things. And when people see those things being protected and they see them existing, they will naturally want to help create more of those spaces. You know, people get so much enjoyment out of that stuff. We need to cap studio rents. We need to cap this in the same way that we cap housing rents. We need to make repurposing of empty buildings much, much easier. We need to lower rents and business rates for cultural startups. All of these things will bring money back into the economy. The arts has a massive opportunity to contribute so much money that could be used for housing, that could become self-sustainable. But you need a little bit of leeway to get that ball rolling. I mean, artists don't have a union. There is an artists union, but because of the nature of the way art is made or music is made, you have the idea, you physically make it, and then you hope that other people will like it and will fund it, or you'll break even or eventually make some money out of it. But you make it anyway, and that's the thing, you make it anyway. They will become self-sustainable, but you just need that little bit of help to get things going, because that money stays in the local community and people enjoy those spaces, and you know, it becomes self-sustainable. Basically, we need to protect what we already have, and we need more of it, in a nutshell, I guess.